Hey everyone, welcome back to the Coalition for Marriage YouTube channel. Now, last week we began a conversation with Mr. Lyman Stone all about the impending demographic crisis that we're facing, not just in the Western world, but across the world, and the absolutely fundamental role that marriage has in taking that conversation forward and sorting some of our problems. So let's get straight back into, I would refer you back to last week's conversation if you haven't heard it, and let's get back into part 2 of 2 and see what Lyman has for us in the way of solutions and a way forward. So marriage is the thing that seems to make the difference. So if a state then decides, well, actually, we do need more people. So let's take Hungary as an example, who have recently said, well, look, actually, we want more indigenous people. Yes, we want to have inward migration in a controlled way, but actually, we want to have more indigenous people. So we want to encourage people to get married because we recognize the data. So let's kind of talk around that for a moment. Why are fewer people getting married, and why is that even more the case at the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum than at the higher end of the socioeconomic spectrum? So why are fewer people getting married? And then once we've fleshed that out a bit, we'll maybe talk about, so what are the solutions? So are fewer people getting married, first of all?
Yeah, marriage rates are declining all around the world, with a few exceptions that I'll mention. But around the world, marriage rates are falling. Marriage is coming later in life, or not at all. Your paradigmatic case of this is somewhere like South Korea or Japan. There are exceptions. In India, average age of marriage is still, India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, average age of marriage is still quite young, and yet their fertility is still falling. There are some unusual reasons for that related to sort of population politics in South Asia, interacting with some of the, frankly, local religious cultures in South Asia. When we talk about cultural dynamics like marriage, you can never separate that from all the other things happening in a culture, right?
Absolutely.
Race, ethnicity, religion, politics. So these things all play together. So there will always be exceptions. A country like India where, okay, yes, people still get married at a very young age. They have 2 kids, and then they get sterilized at age 25. Why do they do that? Well, they do that because of a very particular set of, political and religious ideas that work together to facilitate a very specific kind of fertility control. Setting that aside, what do we see? We see marriage getting later and less. Even within that exceptions, Hungary is one of the big exceptions. Marriage rates in Hungary have risen really very dramatically in recent years. So they launched this program where newlyweds could take out a loan of the equivalent of, I want to say it was like $30,000 or $40,000, which is a lot of money. Even in the US, it's a lot of money, but in Hungary, it's a lot of money. Of course, you're in the UK, so I have no idea what that is in pounds. And they got this loan, and it was interest-free for a certain number of years. That is, they didn't have to pay anything on it for a couple of years. And then as long as they had children, chunks of the loan would be forgiven. And if they had 3 children within, I think it was 10 years, the entire loan would be forgiven. 9 months after it was rolled out, there was actually it looked like a real effect. Now I haven't followed up with the latest data, but it looked, like it might actually be fairly successful. It looked like they might have found a winner on that one, because it was finally they were spending real money on just giving people just cash, a big check in their bank account right up front. That seemed to work. I'm not sure if it's continued working, but it seemed to work at least for a year or two. And so Hungary, when everybody else had their birth rates fall during COVID, Hungary's didn't fall. This is happening all over the world. Perinatal policies are being rolled out everywhere. I mean, heck, China's trying it now. Not very successfully, but they're trying. But, some of the most successful perinatal policies are in, little countries like Hungary, that speak languages that are not widely spoken in the West, like Hungary. And so they never make news in our country. The only reason Hungary does is because their relationship with the European Union is so toxic that their government has needed to kind of recruit political allies abroad. And so their family policy is a nice way to make nice with conservatives around the world. But, Georgia has the most successful pronatal policy, ever documented. They increased their fertility from 1.5 to 2.2 in the space of 18 months. And they didn't spend a penny doing it. Now, it was a religious thing. And then to keep it high, they did end up rolling out a bunch of pronatal policies to kind of reinforce a religious movement that had taken place. But, countries like Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, they're doing a lot of interesting stuff. Czechia has one of the most successful pronatal policies in the world in terms of actually, deviating from trend of their neighbors and really, really achieving something. France has had higher fertility than most countries in Western Europe for decades and decades and decades. And the reason is because of their uniquely generous pronatal fiscal policies and tax policies. The UK, there's a very nice study in the UK showing that during the Great Recession, your central bank did a set of unusual monetary policies that resulted in some households getting an unusually big drop in their mortgage payments for 2 to 5 years during the Great Recession. Those households had a lot of babies in that time period.
That was interesting because I think that was to do with being able to set off your mortgage interest against your tax or something like that, wasn't it?
That basically your central bank created a baby boom among a subset of families. There's a mile-high stack of research on, policy and fertility. And what it shows is policy works. And I know that this is where I'm probably going to disagree with the birth gap guy. He and a lot of catastrophists on this topic. Actually, let me say, there's some people who they're really into the catastrophizing idea of low fertility. And there's other people like, oh, it's no problem at all. It's fine. It'll work itself out. We just need to adapt to this brave new world. And what those people all agree on is there's nothing to be done. Right? It's like, well, doing normal policies really doesn't matter. They're all wrong. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of high quality academic papers studying different policies in different countries at different times. And I'm not going to say uniformly, but they overwhelmingly show, in fact, a recent systematic review concluded that, we have very strong evidence to believe that, in fact, fertility is quite responsive to kind of normal policy choices. There's a very funny paper showing recently that car seat laws reduce fertility. But regardless, if you make having babies cheaper, people do more of it. Now, they don't have twice as many kids. These kinds of normal policies can increase fertility by, 0.1, 0.2, 0.3 kids per woman. And maybe if you get some real creative policies like what we've seen in Georgia or Israel or maybe France, maybe you can get a bigger long run effect, maybe 0.4, 0.5, 0.6. But you know what? If you're talking about the difference between 1.6 and 1.8 kids, that's a big difference. That's in the US, that's hundreds of thousands of children a year. That's a huge difference. That's worth having.
So there's an awful lot of other things that kind of play into this because again, first of all, there's set-offs. Whenever anything happens, there are balance. We were in Hungary recently, and I tried to talk to as many people as I could, and the majority are kind of supportive of the idea of what they're trying to do. The government there, what they're trying to do, and the majority of people I spoke to seemed openly supportive of the idea. But on the ground, it was often very complicated. So, for example, you could have, if you had 4 children, you could have around 12 years of paid leave as a woman, and you'll never pay a penny of tax again. But that 12 years of paid leave comes from your employer. So your employer then thinks, not going to employ a woman because
Yep.
there's no way I can afford to pay her for 12 years while she has babies.
Yep.
And, and so there's kind of balances back. And so they're saying, well, actually the government needs to step
Yeah.
in and really do something and help.
So
them.
paid leave is probably the weakest tool for encouraging fertility. Paid leave, research suggests that leave time doesn't increase fertility very much. And it's because of exactly what you just said. It creates this weird trade-off of work and family, and all. It doesn't work very well. Your most effective policies for encouraging fertility are, your most effective fiscal policies, I should say, are basically just baby bonuses, like just big lump sum payments at or around the time of birth. And that's why Hungary's last policy, their like big newlywed bonus, basically worked, because it was just like a big chunk of cash right when you're like, I wonder if we should have a baby.
Right when you need
it. That works,
which makes sense. Yeah.
Whereas, like, if you give people like, these very diffuse benefits that are actually basically tied to their work, it's not that good.
It's not that good.
And this is why childcare is not that beneficial either. Childcare, you get fewer babies per dollar you spend on childcare than you get from other pronatal policies. And the reason is that a lot of the money you spend on childcare is going to families that only want to have one kid, right? That their main value is work. And they want to have one or two kids and put them in childcare and then go work. Whereas your families that want to have 4 or 5 kids, like the mom doesn't want to work. So she's not going to use childcare. She's going to stay home. So you exclude a lot of families, and you end up excluding a lot of families who are in some sense the cheapest to incentivize. And in the UK, you have a real problem with this, because a lot of your family benefits cap at like 2 kids.
Oh yeah.
That is, you can't claim them for like more than 2 kids. And to me, this is absurd. This is like facially anti-family discriminatory nonsense.
Absolutely. Yeah, it caps at 2 kids, and it also caps at a fairly low. So it looks at the family income.
So it's
again,
absurd.
The benefits and the tax system approach it in a very different way, in opposite ways, which doesn't make any sense at all. But both are kind of counterintuitive when it comes to encouraging people to have more kids and stay together.
Yeah, it's absolutely absurd. And I mean, this is the thing, is that a lot of people think, oh, well, like the rise of the welfare state, replaced the man, and women didn't need the man anymore, and so it reduced marriage. And this is not true, because we have places where the welfare state didn't rise, and yet marriage still fell. So that's like Japan and Korea and stuff. What is true is that almost everywhere that the welfare state rose, at the exact same time, one of the things that happened is people said, who really needs help? Single moms. So let's make extra super big benefits for single moms. So they created marriage penalties. And wherever marriage penalties rose, yes, single motherhood rose. Because surprise, if you incentivize single motherhood by giving bigger... So actually the UK, I forget when it was repealed. I think it wasn't repealed until like 2005 or something. But the UK used to have a special additional benefit for single mothers.
And that's the trade-off, isn't it? That's, I come from a single parent background myself. And, I know that poverty is an awful thing. To grow up in a situation of poverty is terrible for a child. Absolutely terrible. But equally, you've got to avoid kind of paying people effectively to
and this is my point, is you can have a welfare state. Just don't discourage marriage in it. Make it so that, okay, so you want to help poor people. Okay, help poor people. But don't help them extra just because they're single. Yeah. Like, if they're poor, help them, regardless if they're married or single.
Regardless.
Ensure that getting married doesn't make you lose benefits.
I interviewed Mark Regnerus recently. And he wrote a book about, his book was focusing on Christians. And of course, I'm a Christian, our board of Christians, but we have, of our tens of thousands of supporters, they come from all faiths and none. But in terms of why people are marrying later, I mean, he just looked at Christians and he said, well, look, marriage is becoming more of a capstone, something you do to crown your life later on, as opposed to something you build your life on from the start. And I'm just wondering, so it's kind of a two-sided conversation, isn't it? What you do about it and why it's happening in the first place. And you look at things in your paper like levels of debt. Is that the reason? The cost of housing, is that the reason? maybe things like the fact that we live in a much more promiscuous society. I mean, men can get sex relatively cheaply from a commitment perspective. Why would they bother getting married? All those things.
So I absolutely agree with Mark's argument about capstone marriage. I just published a report last year using some new data on Canada. And we argue that it's not just marriage, kids are becoming a capstone as well, right? It used to be that you want to have kids when you're young enough to enjoy them. Now you want to have kids when you're old enough to enjoy them, right? The difference is you used to have kids when you were young enough to be physically healthy to enjoy them for a long time. Now you want to have kids when you're old enough to have your life stable and wealthy enough to pay for all the things so that you enjoy them, right? So there's this change. And the same thing has kind of happened with marriage. And there's a couple of things going on here. One is that people live longer, like just point blank. If you're only going to live with your spouse 15 years before one of you dies, the stakes are lower, right? Like you don't have to like them as much. And I know that sounds like, and so also the rise of capstone marriage in recent years has seen a decline in divorce rates. Like people are being choosier and they are matching into better matches. Yep. Now, there's a caveat with that. Religious people don't benefit from waiting longer. Me and Brad Wilcox have a really nice paper on this where we show that for religious people, waiting past age 25 does not reduce odds of divorce. For secular people, it does, but for religious people, waiting past age 25 to get married doesn't reduce your odds of divorce. Just doesn't. There's no evidence for it. So religious people, you can hit your capstone early. But it's not just life expectancy. Other things have shifted in the life course too, right? Nobody gets married while they're in school, right? This is actually really weird, right? Like, why don't people get married while they're in school? Like, you could. Nobody's stopping you. You could just get married, and yet, like the summer after you finish school, like weddings. Why? Why do people wait? Social norms. Okay, there's a norm that like you get married after you are what? Well, a real adult. So how do you become a real adult? Well, being a learner makes you a child. And I know that like we talk about like lifelong learners, the reality is cross-culturally, sociologically, anthropologically, being a learner makes you a child. If you are the learner, not the teacher, you're a child. Now, I don't mean that pejoratively, but I mean like the social role of learner is the social role of child. And so what we're doing as education gets later in life, and I'm not saying like, oh, people should stop going to college. No, but I'm saying that we have to be realistic. What we're doing is we are extending childhood. That is, every year you're in school is a year that you feel like a child because you are in the child role. And so you hear professors talking about their students as kids. Kids. They're not kids. They're adults. They vote. They drink. They can be conscripted. They're adults, but we call them kids. As long as you are in school, you are socially a child.
But
when people graduate school
in the UK, school, you're talking about university. What we would talk university as well. So yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. Just different terminology over here, but yeah.
So the extension of schooling has extended childhood, which has made people correctly sense that they're still a child and it's not appropriate for them to marry.
Interesting. And as we have academic inflation, so a degree is no longer you now need a master's or you need a PhD, so you're in school for longer, so you get married later.
I actually have a paper right now that it's in draft, but it'll be published in not too long, where me and a co-author show that like the extent of labor regulation in a U.S. state predicts the gap between desired and actual fertility. That the more regulated your labor market, the bigger the gap is. Because it just makes it hard to like get started on life and get that right work-life balance that you like. So capstone marriage has emerged because young people correctly sense that like they are being precluded from adulthood by the fact that society does not supply any meaningful rituals of adulthood, by the fact that society demands that they remain children for years and years and years in school situations, and by the fact that they're really not able to get onto the real employment ladder for years and years and years. And so, the time between like completion of, got a job, owned a home, finished school, and got married, that gap hasn't changed. Okay, like people get married.
Wow. And what about, so that there's also I mean, you seem to dismiss the debt thing because you say, well, actually.
Oh no, debt matters too. Yeah, there's financial elements to this. Debt's a complicated animal because you can have a situation where somebody has a lot more debt than someone else, but the cost of carrying their debt is a lot lower because, they got a subsidized loan with interest, It's a very complicated beast. In general, I don't think debt is the main driver here, but yeah, it's part of the equation.
And certainly not in the UK because, a lot of people will never pay their student debt off. It'll get written off way before they've paid, a fraction of it.
And your all's university is just way cheaper than ours.
Yeah.
Although you also have lower salaries. So.
Yeah. So what about the disparity between higher socioeconomic and lower socioeconomic? So better off people are still marrying in relatively good numbers, but the worse off who could really do with the benefits of marriage are much less likely proportionately to marry.
There's two dynamics there. One is I talked about marriage penalties. Who is exposed to marriage penalties? Well, there are people who are in the income ranges to be sensitive to the welfare state. It's not that the welfare state inherently must create marriage penalties. It's just that in every country that's ever had one, they have created them because, single mothers are highly sympathetic beneficiaries. Save the children, right?
Yeah.
And also because of sexism, right? Because people see women as weak. And when a woman gets married, they say, well, the man can take care of you. Because men don't need help. Who cares if a man is poor? Yep. You get these very, very sexist ideas that end up creating penalties for marriage, right? Married people don't need help because a man is the welfare.
Yep.
The man is your welfare state. And it basically just says, hey, men, why don't you do it? And it's like, well, part of the problem is a lot of the jobs men used to have kind of went away. So yeah, these are the people exposed to marriage penalties. And there was a nice paper that showed that something like 30 or 40% of the decline in marriage in America could be accounted for simply by marriage penalties in the welfare state. Right. So, it's a huge factor. And then the other is when I talked about, okay, you don't get married until you've achieved all those things, school, house, whatever. Well, how do you measure socioeconomic status? Those same things, school, house, income, whatever. So yeah, if you look at the people who have achieved socioeconomic status, higher status, they're the people who they're at a place where they now feel comfortable getting married, having kids. It's like in Canada where I live, fertility rates are actually higher for richer Canadians than for poorer Canadians.
Right.
And in fact, historically people think poor people have more kids and rich people have fewer. That's changing. In recent cohorts, there's very little difference in fertility rate across income levels. And in some countries, rich people now have more kids. And it's because of the shift towards capstone family, right? That the life course is pushing all these things later. And so only people who really achieve wealth and status can end up achieving this family life.
Interesting. And of course, as people get married later, the window for having children closes. For females especially, not so much for males, but for females, it's a much shorter window. So you don't.
Well, hold on. Let's interrogate that for a second. It closes for men too, because it's important to remember what that window for children is. Like, let's say we invent a magical fertility drug that means that now you can conceive and bear a child at any age. Are people going to have kids at age 80? No, you're not going to live to see them do anything. The reality is, fertility rates for women in their 40s are lower today than they were 100 years ago. Okay, if people wanted to be having more kids in their 40s, a lot of people would. But the reality is, a lot of people don't want to have kids in their 40s because your body doesn't heal the same way. Because, do you want to be, what's your life, how old are you going to be when they hit major milestones? And that's true for men as well. Also, your biological paternity does change as you age as well. But there are a lot of different biological clocks. Women's fecundability is not the only biological clock in play here. Your life expectancy, your health expectancy, your arthritis, your ability to deal with lack of sleep, Your vision of like, do you want to know your grandkids? Do you want to be at your grandkids' weddings? These kinds of things. This is all really important calculations that people do. And so, I mean, I think it's important to emphasize that there is a biological clock for everyone. Your days are numbered, oh man.
That's a really interesting point. Now, listen, you're a busy guy, so I don't want to take up too much. I could talk to you all day, Lyman. It's fascinating. But some people reckon actually the state should stay out of human relationships altogether. Okay, but given the fact that we think maybe the state can incentivize things a little bit, come the 2024 election, were whoever to win to come up to you and say, "Hey, Lyman, I've read you're a good guy with some great ideas. Come and tell me what to do to promote marriage and children in the US." What would you be saying? What would your top 5 policy initiatives be?
Okay, I'm going to give you those, but that's a really short question. I'm going to start with the more interesting one you hinted at the beginning. Is it okay for the state to intervene at all? And the answer is it's not that it's okay, it's that it's not possible for the state not to intervene. Everything the state does touches family life. So I'm a Lutheran, and the 4th commandment is honor thy father and thy mother. And we believe that honor thy father and thy mother actually is the basis of all worldly authority, that the entire authority of the state descends from this commandment, that the entire authority of the state is based on the original authority of the family. That the state is a project that families do to collaborate together to protect their intergenerational interests. This is our catechism says this. Okay. Theologically, I'm committed to the idea that there's nothing that the state can do that doesn't intervene in family. It's not possible to not intervene in family because the state is a family business. Now, you might not share my theological beliefs, but at the end of the day, doesn't the state provide public education? That's a huge intervention in family life.
And look at what it's doing to family life at the moment.
Sure. And, there's
another conversation.
I mean, there's all kinds of debates, but like, isn't that an intervention? Don't we, provide a different tax status based on marriage or singleness? Isn't that an intervention? Don't we provide public housing? Isn't that an intervention? Don't we provide, police who enforce family law? Isn't that an intervention? Don't we enforce contracts? Isn't that an intervention? So this idea that, the state should just not intervene. When you're saying the state shouldn't intervene, what you're saying is you like all the current interventions and you just don't want to see them change. You think society is, as it is right now, is exactly what family should be. Non-interventionism is simply an endorsement of the status quo. So instead, I would say we have to accept that everything we do has high stakes for family. There's no way that you can just not impact children. Okay, they inherit the world you build. So we have to take that duty very seriously. We have to weigh everything we do. When you have a piece of legislation, you get a budget score for it. You should get a family score for it. What does it do to marriage penalties? What's it likely to do to child welfare? What's it going to do to these? What does it do to these things?
Great idea. Great idea.
These are the most fundamental elements of human life. And so fundamentally, the non-interventionist perspective is just bonkers. It's just self-deception and lying. It's self-deception. It's public deception. When politicians say this, it is public fraud. Okay. So that said, what should we do?
Very unambiguously put there.
Look. So for that, the people that I share this in common with are like this. I believe climate change is caused by humans and is very bad for the world. Okay, stipulated. But like the super climate change extremists who are like, stop having babies. Like me and them, we get each other because we all recognize that like this is all very high stakes and all this matters for population. Like we get each other. We disagree, but we get each other. Okay. So I don't want to make people have kids they don't want to have. I don't want to make people even get to replacement rate if they don't want replacement rate. I just want people to be able to have the kids they want to have. If they want to have 0 kids, I don't want them to have 1 kid. Okay? So how do we do policies that help people achieve the things they want to achieve? So first of all, item 1, build, baby, build. Okay? The biggest cost for families is housing. You got to have houses. You need houses for people. The big barrier to houses is all these zoning and land use rules that make it impossible to build. You need to strip away all the zoning and land use rules. You need to be able to build and build and build. Make housing cheap. Housing should be a crappy investment. Okay? Like, I want housing prices to fall so that all the homeowners are really sad about their housing investment. And I know that everybody's like, that's horrible. Yeah. But you know what?
Yeah.
Here's the reality. Long run, if population is growing, house prices are not actually going to fall. Okay? There's just not. What we're really saying is we want house prices to have a normal and disciplined ratio to income. Right now they don't. So build houses, build them everywhere, build them often, build them ugly, build them beautiful. Okay? Build. Item 2, pay parents. The reality is parents make an enormous sacrifice. They give up huge amounts of income, sleep, time, health. They retire with less money in the bank. And then they also get less from their pensions because pensions, relate to income and all these things. Parents shoulder an enormous load for who? For society. We should pay them for it. There are different ways you can do this. Many countries have caretaker credits in their public pensions, where if you take time off work with a small child at home, you get like a credit in your pension. We can expand those, make them bigger. The U.S. doesn't have one. I don't know if the U.K. does. If you don't, if your country,
I don't think it does. No. So
yeah, so you can implement them. Yeah. But many countries have these. This is not like some wild-eyed right-wing conspiracy.
Yep.
A caretaker credit in retirement programs is a very reasonable thing. You can make it big. You can make it generous, and also it shouldn't only be if you leave work. Like, if you have legal custody of a child, you should get some kind of caretaker credit. And if you do leave work to take care of them, you should get even more. Okay, in your retirement. But that's not enough. So that's pay parents in their retirement. Second, pay parents today. Parents are doing work today. If you have a public child care program, you recognize that those child care workers are doing work. Is the parent at home doing worse work? Like, is their work less socially valuable? No. Just because, like if a parent goes and starts flipping burgers at I don't know, that's my American analogy. What's the British one? Like,
we have burgers here.
Frying chips at a fast food place or something.
All right, matey.
And they get paid minimum wage, and then they put their kid in childcare, and the total cost of enrolling that child in childcare is also minimum wage. Did that benefit society? Like, no, it didn't. Probably the parent with the child would have given more loving and beneficial care.
Although it does contribute to GDP, this obsession with getting the economy bigger, and so
but we can fix that. We can fix that. It contributes to GDP because there's a measured wage for the child care worker. So give parents a measured wage. Let them report some hours and get them paid. Now, you can't pay them minimum wage for every hour that they work. That would break the public budget. But you know what? You can Finland, many countries, Finland is a good example, provide homemaker allowances for families that don't have their kids in childcare. This is totally reasonable. Lots of countries do this. It's not some vast right-wing conspiracy. Finland is not like a crazy right-wing place.
It certainly isn't. You're quite right.
We're talking about like social democratic paradise here. A homemaker allowance is totally reasonable. And again, you can pair it with public child care in centers as well. I'm saying just give people a choice, a fair choice, where they are treated fairly on both sides.
So would you means test that, or would it be available to everyone?
No. None of this should be means tested.
Okay.
This is about your job as a parent, not that you're poor. Right. Your job as a parent doesn't matter if you're rich or poor.
Yep.
Okay? So I would say you need to make the benefit big enough that middle-class people think it's valuable, which means for poor people, it's going to be a lot of money.
Yeah.
Okay. So what? I'm up to 3. You asked for 5.
Yeah. So you're building houses.
I'm building houses. I'm tweaking the retirement program.
Yep.
I'm doing a
paying
homemaker
parents to
allowance.
stay at home and look after kids. Yep. Anything you'd steal from Hungary or Georgia or anywhere else like that?
If a country did those 3 big things,
Yep.
let's say a country does it. Oh, marriage penalties. Sorry. Yeah, really, item 2 should be marriage penalties. Is look for marriage penalties in your current law and get rid of them.
Okay.
Okay, balance out.
Yeah, that's massive, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a huge one. But like, look for marriage penalties and get rid of them. Okay, so let's say you do these 4 things. You build, baby, build. You deal with a bunch of marriage penalties. You tweak your retirement system, and you do a homemaker allowance. What else should you do? Item 5, I would say, is dealer's choice. And what I mean by that is do those things and then like wait a couple of years and like see how things go. Because every society is a little bit different. And you're going to find once you do those things, that now there's a new choke point. There's a new hurdle. There's a new, you've pulled some of the dams out of the river. The water's flowing downstream and it hits a new obstacle. So then figure out what that is and deal with that. Okay. In general, I would actually say it's good to do these policies not all at once, like space them out by a year or 2, because parents are a very skeptical and paranoid bunch. They see the government offer a benefit and they're like, my kid's going to be with me for like 18 to 30 years. Is this benefit going to be with me for 18 to 30 years?
Yes.
So spacing these things out, having more benefits come every 2 or 3 years is a very persuasive way of saying this stuff is going to stick. It's going to be here for you. It's going to stick around. You want both parties passing this stuff. Okay. You got to persuade parents that it's real. It's going to stick. It's going to be there. And that means, so I would say item 5, dealer's choice, is basically pass this stuff, wait a few years and be like, okay, what's the new problem? And a big part of finding that new problem is data. And so
which you've got loads of, which is great. In the US, you've got so much more than we have in the UK.
Yeah. And so what you need to do is you need to be, collecting data. That means, if your government isn't going to do it, and they're not, that means private foundations really need to step up, do their job, and finance data collection. This is like what private foundations can and should do. You need to be surveying people about their fertility, their family, their marriages, all these things, often and in detail.
Great stuff. Lyman, I could talk to you all day. Perhaps we'll get you back sometime and we'll delve a little bit further, because I think you're a goldmine of information. Whoever wins in 2024 down your side of the pond, I reckon we should get you into play, because you've got some brilliant ideas there.
I'm afraid I'm probably not on speaking terms with either party these days.
No. Well, maybe somebody with enough maturity to recognize that you've still got something to add to the conversation. But who knows, hey? Listen, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for the work you're doing. Stay in touch. And, I'd love to see some of the things you just spoke about become actual policies that made a real difference. Lyman Stone, real joy to talk to you. Thank you.
My pleasure.